All right, welcome back, guys. In this video, we're going to be reading The Secrets of Atlantis by Dr. Doreal. Dr. Doreal was the original translator in the early, well, not the original translator, but from what I understand, he was the original English translator of the Emerald Tablets, and this was in the 1920s when he went down to the Pyramid of the Sun down in Mexico, Teotihuacan, City of the Gods, and recovered these tablets that were hidden underneath that pyramid. So after you read Doreal's translation of the Emerald Tablets, there's a whole second half of his book entitled The Secrets of Atlantis, which is him giving an explanation of each translation, or basically putting it into other words and adding a bunch of commentary and other things into it. So we're going to read that part right now. It is entitled The Secrets of Atlantis by Dr. Doreal. By a great many people, Atlantis is looked on as a legendary continent which never had real existence. The only account we have of Atlantis is the one by Plato in his dialogue with Timaeus, where he says his grandfather was told by an Egyptian priest that their ancestors came from a land in the Western Ocean. This was supposed to have been destroyed by the sinking of the land some 12,000 years before. It is true that few traces of their culture can be found today, but the Atlanteans left records that are still preserved by the wisdom schools. The sinking of Atlantis was the source of the universal legends of the deluge as recorded in the Old Testament and in the folklore of almost every race in the world. The ancient records of Atlantis tell us that the sinking of Atlantis was brought about because the souls of the Atlanteans, who had developed such a tremendous knowledge about the cosmic and natural laws, had passed on to a higher plane. Atlanteans of the last days were mostly souls that were low in the scale of development, yet they had access to the mighty science developed by their ancestors. The science was so great that if used improperly, it could destroy the world. The people had deteriorated until they were no longer worthy to have access to the vast knowledge and wisdom that they had inherited from their ancestors. The souls that occupied the bodies of those in the later period of the Atlantean age were souls that were low in development. By the end of the Atlantean age, the great advances had been made in the sciences and the arts. For instance, they had developed flying machines that were capable of tremendous speeds, able to fly to the moon and back and encircle the world in an hour or less. Sounds like UFOs, kind of like the ones the secret space program has reverse engineered and people see all over the place and film with their smartphones. These ships were very light metal, similar to aluminum, but were much harder than steel. They were very magnetic and susceptible to the magnetic currents of the Earth and of space. They were made of an alloy obtained by the action of sodium on sesquichloride of chromium subjected to electrical and magnetic stress. They were not affected by heat or cold, and even at cruising speed capable of traveling 1,000 miles an hour or more. They were powered by a helix of 7 wires, the central one, the greatest one in diameter. Each alternate one was coiled in an opposite direction. These were collectors of magnetic current. Sounds like Tesla coils and magnetism, vortex-based geometry, which is exactly what Tesla was tapping into with, the Tesla coils and the number 369 and the vortex geometry. I wouldn't be surprised if Dr. Doreal and Nikola Tesla knew each other personally, or at least knew of each other, because when Dr. Doreal recovered these tablets back in the early 1900s. That's like around the time when Tesla was alive and doing his research. Because Tesla was born in the, I think, like the mid to late 1800s. And then a lot of his research was late 1800s going into the early 1900s. Two 12-foot antennae on the outside of the ship were connected to the wires of two helixes. These wires extended to the inner wall of the ship and were coiled in opposite directions around the ship over its entire length. The 7 wires of each standard extended in radiation, those of one crossing those of the other, and were wound around the entire body of the ship as a core, which could be then turned or moved in any direction on bearings. The current could be slowed or speeded up in its movement through these coils, thus advancing or retarding the speed of the ship or its distance from the Earth. Each ship projected around itself a field force which prevented friction from the air from acting upon the ship. Also, through the use of their advanced science, they were able to suspend the gravity within the ship so that those... Oh, hang on, I've got to turn the page here. The page is stuck. All right. So that those who were in it were not affected by the tremendous speeds that it attained. You know, I was talking about this in other videos that I posted on YouTube about how the Mercury vortex engines create that anti-gravity bubble around the ship, and then they're multi-dimensional. It's like multi-dimensional technology, so anything inside that bubble is no longer susceptible to third-dimensional things like gravity, and that's how they're able to do right-angle turns without the G-forces killing all the passengers. This is exactly what he's describing here. This is my first time reading this, by the way, so like, it's just you know, the more this ancient stuff I read, it's like the more and more it all connects the dots with all the other stuff I've been talking about, all the other books, all the secret space program stuff, the military reverse engineering. It's all like the exact same stuff is being described here. Same with the ancient Sumerian, Zechariah, Sitchin, all that stuff. With such ships sailing vessels on the seas were unnecessary, for they were able to go to their far-flung colonies very quickly and without effort on their part. The buildings of Atlantis, as of their colonies, were not composed of bricks and stones and metal, as of those of later date, but were created by fixing patterns of force in suspension and attracting around them vortices of cosmic dust. By the use of complicated patterns, they were able to form or create great buildings in a matter of seconds, and these remained intact until the pattern around which they were formed was dissolved by the builders. It is for this reason that we do not find monumental remains of the ancient Atlanteans in the various parts of the world where their colonies had been built. When the Atlanteans passed, so also the patterns which they had set up were dissolved and their buildings. The great cities vanished from the face of the earth, with the exception of a few artifacts which had been created from the natural materials of the earth as hobbies by those who desired to maintain some of the arts of ancient times. They had 12 months and 28 days, and one of 29 for 3 years, and every 4th year one of 30. Their religion was the adoration of the principle of spiritual life, which they called Den Ze Menze. The priests were called the Deltzanza. Punishment for crimes against the state was invariably exile from the motherland and her colonies for varying periods of time. There was a complete equality of sexes in civil life. Any person of any age or sex being able to hold office in any of the positions either of the civil government or of the priestly caste. Education was free but compulsory for all, for it was considered that one who did not have knowledge could not live life to the fullest. Their philosophy encompassed time, space, and life, three infinitely related elements cooperating, eternal, immaterial, unchanging in their relative condition of cooperation or codependence on the infinite cycle of existence. The basic principles of their belief included the overspirit, the source of animation, the immaterial form covering the spiritual, the material form covering the immaterial, the magnetic principle in universal creation, the electric principle in universal creation, the infinite mind manifest in time, space, and light, the developing principle in universal creation. They taught that nothing exists without an infinite counterpart, and nothing comes into existence without the ruling of specific natural law. On one of the islands was a great temple built in the form of a pyramid. This was on the land, or on the island called Unal. It was beneath the temple that the halls of Amente, which are spoken of in the Emerald Tablets, was found. And it was there that the seven lords of the cycles had their manifestations. This temple was not a temple of worship in the strictest sense of the word, but rather it was a focal point upon this earth of all the divine wisdom of the cosmic consciousness, or God. There was another island called Undal, upon which the great mystery schools were formed, and it was there that all of those who passed beyond the ordinary schools of Atlantis went for instruction in the great mysteries of light and the spirit. And it was there that the wise men of other races, of nations of the earth, came for instructions according as they were able to receive, to carry back to their own countries and peoples knowledge and wisdom which later on was incorporated into the folklore and mythology of the descendants. Those races had been forgotten by present-day man. Beneath the earth, the same islands were inhabited by the serpent race, with the bodies of man and heads of great serpents. These serpents had hypnotic power of causing their heads to assume that of any human being or form. Again, more references to the shape-shifting reptilians, which I think are still here on this planet. Thus, in latter days, though they had been almost destroyed and exterminated by the great Atlantean race, the few survivors gradually began to insinuate themselves into places of the rulers of Atlantis, killing them and assuming their form and features so that it became necessary for a means to be developed attesting as to whether one were a true man or a serpent race. This serpent race, these reptilians, they have to still be here on this planet. Like, they still have to be here and have some involvement with finagling their way into government and assuming the bodies of humans, even though they really aren't humans. Because I think a lot of these governors and some of these presidents and people in power, like, they have to be reptilians. The wise men evolved a word which could only be pronounced by human vocal cords and not by those of the snake people. That word was Kinnigan, and it is still a great dispeller of illusion. Once each year, the rulers of Atlantis stood before the people assembled and pronounced the word so that the people knew, or so that the people could know, that they were ruled by their own kind. I wonder if this word, it's spelled Kinniinigan. I wonder if that's like a metaphorical for a cymatic frequency or a certain sound wave or a very specific vibration that would like unmask these shape-shifting reptilians. It is from the knowledge of the hypnotic power of the serpent race and their battle against mankind that we have the legends of warfare between man and the old serpents, and the legends that the serpents has hypnotic power. It was not the snake that we have today, but the serpent that walks like a man. The old serpent race of Atlantis, that man considered the ultimate of evil, gave rise to the legend of the serpent tempting Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. The wise men of Atlantis had developed great powers and forces which are unknown at the present time. In them, the third eye was open. The greater part of the people could communicate with each other through the means of telepathy. They had knowledge of molding force of creation, which they used in the construction of their buildings and implements. The force was called Doreal, the molding force of creation. The Atlanteans had great libraries in which books recording the history of 500,000 years could be found. But those books are not likely the books which we read today. They were very small boxes. Very small boxes, well, like data, like a USB or something, maybe is what they're talking about. They probably, they probably had, little almost like USBs or like hard drives where they could just store data. Each one with a small lens in it, a series of projecting studs or switches powered by a tiny atomic motor, from which could be projected the actual three-dimensional replica of historical events, scenes which had occurred in the far past. That sounds like a computer that projects a hologram, and then it's almost like a movie, like a holographic computer projector that could store data, is what that sounds like. Stories were acted out and could be projected so that they seemed to appear in the air before the seer as if they were actual solid material. All of the wisdom and knowledge that had been gained was thus preserved and was accessible to all. They've probably got some of these underneath the Vatican. Many evil and ancient beliefs in magic derived from the legends of this time were only the remnants of the great science of the Atlanteans and those who preceded it. So-called magic is only unknown science, which has been lost and forgotten by modern man. The cross was a great symbol in ancient Atlantis. It was considered a symbol of the earthly Eden from which 4 rivers flowed. This Eden and rivers symbolically has reference to the 4 divine principles or powers known and used by the Atlanteans. All the natural powers exercised by Atlanteans depended upon the use of the etheric forces which they called mana, because these were in great part controlled by the mental powers. The force later became related to manas, the mind of the Hindu yoga. Mana, or etheric essence, is a tremendous force, all-pervading, which may be tapped to supply illimitable energy. All so-called miracles are accomplished by conscious or unconscious tapping of this energy. In this case, a sympathetic attunement is made. The knowledge, degraded, was the basis of all ancient sympathetic magic, because space was filled with this mysterious essence which is subdivided into an almost countless number of kinds. The study of the heavens was undertaken to find the key to its releasement. This was the true origin of astrology and astronomy. In ancient times, the astrologer could use a heaven chart as a means of tapping the inexhaustible reservoir for sympathetically An individual born under a certain configuration of the heavens was attuned with definite divisions or kinds of this etheric energy under the sympathetic vibrational law. It was for this reason that the Atlanteans developed special guilds born under different signs for the control of the 12 major divisions of the etheric energy. There was on Atlantis the golden race, the black race, the white race, the blue race, the green race, and a red race. Many of the races of modern times are descended from the mixtures of the various races of Atlantis, which were scattered over the earth after the sinking of the motherland. Many of their colonies remaining were small in number, surrounded by barbarous races of tremendous strength, and eventually were absorbed into those barbarous races. But in the being absorbed left their imprint in the color, the skin, some racial configurations, and in some knowledge that they were able to impart even to the savage races. The temple was sealed, that still exists, buried through the silent ages at the bottom of the ocean. But in some time come Atlantis will rise again. The great temple will be unfolded to the world with all of its mighty wisdom and secrets. But this will not occur until the golden age of man has dawned again. Man arising from his bondage to the beast will have taken his true place among the stars. At that time, the Christ kingdom will be established upon earth. In the monumental remains, great cities of the past, such as Tijuanaco in South America, and great structures in the Caroline Islands, we see traces of the vast knowledge that man once had. When we read in Irish mythology of the Tuatha De Danann, the great people of ancient Ireland, where we are reading of the Atlantean colonies which existed in Ireland until a period of some 5,000 years ago, men who had powers to fly through the air, travel underwater, disintegrate the atom, and do many things that are unknown to present science. But the great ones have passed, and the knowledge that they had once had comes to us only faintly through legends and folklore of all the races of the earth, because Atlantis left its imprint on all of the races and all of the religions of the ancient world. It is for that reason that the legend of Adam and the man of the red earth is found amongst all races of people of every part of the world. It is for that reason that certain universal symbols, such as a cross or the swastika, have been found in every land, on every large island, even in the most remote places on earth, because there was no spot so remote that the Atlanteans did not penetrate with their wisdom. There were no races so savage that some knowledge was not retained by them, and the things that they had been taught by those of their ancient people who had been instructed on the island of Undal. All right, so that's the end of the first part of the Secrets of Atlantis. So we'll continue reading the rest of this in another upload.